Hello and welcome to My Karate, My Life. I'm Chrissy Howard. This podcast is a space for stories, lessons and reflections from a lifetime of karate. I've spent over 4 decades training, teaching and learning, not just how to move but how to grow. And through that time I've come to realise that karate is never just about technique, it's about who you become along the way. In this podcast I'll be sharing personal stories from my journey, the challenges, the doubts, the lessons that have stayed with me and the moments that shaped not only my karate but my life. We'll talk about confidence, about fear, about resilience and about what it really means to keep going even when things feel difficult. Some episodes will be quiet reflections, some will be lessons from the dojo and some will be conversations with others walking their own martial path. This isn't about being the best, it's about showing up, learning and continuing, no matter where you are on your journey. Whether you've trained for years or you've never stepped into a dojo, I hope something here speaks to you. So thank you for being here and I look forward to sharing this journey with you. Hello and welcome back to the My Karate, My Life podcast. This is episode 19. I'm Chrissy Howard and this podcast is about karate, budo, and all of the things that I've learned and continue to learn through a lifetime of martial arts. This week I've been thinking about something that actually started with the one-to-one lessons that I teach. I've been thinking about how I prepare for those sessions, what I expect from the student, what I want them to take away, and what happens afterwards. The more I've thought about it, the more I've realised that actually this isn't really No, it's not really an episode about one-to-one teaching after all. It's about responsibility and it's about leadership. And perhaps more importantly, the responsibility that comes with somebody choosing to stand in front of me or you and saying, "Teach me." This episode might initially feel like a conversation aimed at instructors, but I think students will find something in it too. Because understanding what goes on behind the scenes, how your instructor is not only trying to navigate the class, but also understand and respond to you as an individual. This might give you a slightly different perspective on the relationship between teacher and student. When somebody books a one-to-one with me, I don't see it simply as an hour of karate. I don't turn up and think, right, what shall we do today? There's preparation involved. I think about the individual. What have they been working on? What have I seen in them in class? What have they told me they're struggling with? What do they want to achieve? What do I think they need? And actually, I expect them to do some of the preparation too. I want them to come with questions. I want them to have thoughts about their own karate. I expect a little bit of reflection prior to class. I want them to have noticed things because I don't want the session to be, I teach, you copy. I want it to be, we explore. That specific distinction is really important to me because I want the student to understand what they are doing. Not simply reproduce something because I've told them to. We'll break things down. We might experiment a little bit. We'll slow things down. We'll sometimes speed things up. We'll sometimes get it wrong. And that's okay because getting something wrong is part of learning. In fact, you may have heard of it. Hopefully you have. There's a concept in Japanese learning that I really like, Shoshin, the beginner's mind. The idea of approaching something with openness and curiosity, even when we've been doing it for a very long time. Perhaps that is something that we lose as we become more experienced. We start believing we should know. We become afraid of looking like we don't know. But maybe the better martial artist is the person who can remain curious. So learning, of course, it goes in both ways. This is something else I've come to appreciate more. I learn from these sessions too. Every student is different. Different body, different experience, different challenges, different ways of thinking and different questions. Sometimes a student asks me something that I have to stop and think about because actually I've never thought about it like that before. And I think that's really important for a teacher to acknowledge. Being a teacher doesn't mean we know everything. In fact, the longer I train, the more I realise how much I don't know. There's a wonderful irony in that. The more you learn, the more you discover there is still to learn. And that's part of Budo too. We remain students, we continue to learn, we continue to refine, we continue to question. The teacher isn't somebody who has reached the end of the journey. They're simply somebody who has travelled a little further along the road. And I think that requires humility. So what happens after those one-to-one lessons? I don't think the one-to-one finishes when the hour is over. I want the student to leave with something to think about, something to practice, something to notice, perhaps a particular movement, perhaps a feeling. I love a feeling. Perhaps a question. I love those too. And I follow up because I want to know what happened when you took that into your normal training. Did it work? Did it feel different? Did you understand something you hadn't understood before? That got me thinking about something much bigger, because if I care this much about an hour of individual teaching, how much responsibility do I actually have as a teacher? When somebody comes into a dojo, they don't just bring their body, they bring their whole self, their confidence, their insecurities, their previous experiences, their fears, their expectations, sometimes things we know absolutely nothing about. And then they stand in front of us and we correct them, we praise them, we challenge them, we tell them they're doing something wrong, we tell them to try again. And we might think we're simply talking about karate. But are we? Because what if that person already feels that they're not good enough and I say that's wrong, do it again? Maybe that's absolutely fine. Maybe they need that challenge. But what if I don't understand how that person receives my words? What if they're already struggling with confidence? What if they've spent their whole life feeling like they're not good enough? Suddenly, my responsibility is much bigger than correcting a stance. And I think that's something teachers need to be aware of. We know, don't we? We know that learning isn't simply a mechanical process. Our brains are constantly taking in information, making predictions and receiving feedback and then adapting. I think it's really important to recognise how much is going on beneath the surface when somebody is trying to learn something or some things. We're asking the brain and the body to coordinate. We're asking somebody to understand an instruction, organise a movement, control their balance, manage their breathing, remember what they've been told, and then actually execute the technique. Sometimes I can almost see the traffic jam happening. You see somebody trying desperately hard, but suddenly the arms arrive before the feet, or the stance disappears, or left and right somehow cease to exist. And it's not because they're not trying. It's quite the opposite. They're trying incredibly hard. Sometimes they're simply thinking about too many things at once, too many unfamiliar things at once. There can be moments when conscious thought starts interfering with the movement rather than helping it. And this is something I notice quite a lot when I teach. I'm a great observer. I am hypervigilant by nature. And I suspect many of you who teach will recognise this. You know when to stop forcing something. You can see when someone is stuck. And when my students are supporting other people in the dojo, my request is this: support them, but don't teach them, because there's a difference. Sometimes the most helpful thing you can do is create a little space for someone to work something out themselves. I've watched students become so overwhelmed by thought that even knowing right from left becomes a challenge. Sometimes I might joke about it. And I'll say, it's like having a conversation with a drunk person. There is some level of interaction happening, but the information is no longer particularly penetrable. And at that point, it's time to change direction. It's time to reset. If you're listening to this as a student and you've experienced that feeling, please be kind to yourself. We've all heard the expression paralysis by analysis. Sometimes you simply need to drop the thought. Stop practicing that particular thing. Just for a moment. Change direction, take a breath, do something you know. If you're in class, hopefully your instructor notices and moves things forward. Because sometimes the best thing we can do as teachers is allow the struggle to be compartmentalized so that the student can leave thinking about the things they did well rather than going home believing that they can't do the thing they struggled with. And this is why repetition matters. Attention matters. Feedback, of course, matters. Emotions matter. The environment, of course, matters. And when we're learning something difficult, particularly something physical, we need to be able to make mistakes. We need to experiment. We need to receive feedback without that feedback becoming a threat to our identity. So the lovely idea in Buddha around mushin, no mind. I don't interpret that as having no thoughts at all. For me, it's more about not becoming trapped by a thought, allowing the body to do what it has practiced, not over-controlling every single movement. Perhaps that is one of the things we're ultimately trying to achieve through good practice. We think, we practice, we repeat, and eventually some of that thinking becomes doing. So is fearlessness courage? This is where I think courage comes in. I've been thinking a lot about wanting to create a more courageous culture within the dojo, but courage doesn't mean being fearless. Actually, I think courage requires fear. If you're not frightened, you don't necessarily need courage. Courage is, I don't know if I can do this, but I'm going to try. It's, I'm nervous about this grading, but I'm going to step forward. It's, I don't understand this, so I'm going to ask. It's, I made a mistake, and I'm going to have another go. And I want that to be part of my karate culture. I think perhaps it already is, if I'm honest, or at least I hope it is. I loved being asked questions in class because to me it demonstrates engagement, it demonstrates curiosity, and it most certainly demonstrates courage. Curiosity takes courage. You are effectively saying, I don't know, help me understand. And I think that's a wonderful quality in a student. So what kind of leader am I? Leadership. I've started thinking about what kind of leader I am or I want to be. I don't think being a leader means standing at the front of the room and having all of the answers. I think leadership is much more about creating the environment around you. What do I praise? What do I tolerate? What do I ignore? How do I respond when somebody gets something wrong? How do I respond when somebody challenges me? How do I behave when I am frustrated? How do I treat the person who is struggling? And how do I treat the person who is already very good? Students don't just learn from what we tell them, they learn from what we model. And that's where Buddha comes back into it for me. The teacher is part of the curriculum. If we're talking about Buddha, we're talking about more than physical technique. We're talking about a way of developing ourselves. The discipline, the respect, what else? Humility, self-control, perseverance, courage, and of course responsibility. But I can't stand in front of a class and tell people to develop those qualities if I'm not prepared to work on them myself. And work on them I do so very hard. I can't teach humility while needing to be the most important person in the room. I can't teach respect while humiliating somebody. I can't teach courage if I avoid difficult conversations. And I can't teach resilience if I don't allow people to experience failure. So perhaps the teacher is actually part of the curriculum. I am part of what my students are learning, not just my words, but my behaviour, my reactions, my standards, my mistakes, my attitude, everything teaches. So there's an old philosophical, what would you call it? An old philosophical idea that I keep coming back to. We become what we repeatedly do. Whether or not we attribute the exact wording to Aristotle, the principle is a useful one. For sure it's useful. And I think it applies to teaching too. The culture we repeatedly create becomes the culture we have. And then, of course, as a teacher, there are difficult conversations. So this will bring me back to gradings, because gradings are a really good example of the responsibility that comes with teaching. Sometimes a student desperately wants to grade. They've worked hard, they're excited, they've got their sight set on that next belt. And sometimes I might not think they're ready. And that is difficult, because I don't want to disappoint people. I want people to succeed. I want to celebrate with them. But what is my responsibility? Is it just to make my students happy? Or is it to be honest about where they are today? Sometimes leadership means saying, not yet. And I think there's a huge difference between saying you're not good enough and saying you're not ready yet. One is a judgment, the other is an invitation. An invitation to keep working, to understand what needs to improve, to come back stronger. Perhaps that's actually one of the most important things a teacher can give somebody. Not false confidence, but honest confidence. The confidence that comes from knowing I know where I am. I know what I need to work on. And I know what I am capable of becoming. There's another part of this that is really important to me. I believe the hard work is where the reward is. If you're training regularly and when you're there, you're giving enormous effort, I can see your desire to do well. Then, frankly, you had me at hello. I can work with that. I can teach that. I can develop that. Because effort and commitment tell me something about the person standing in front of me. But there's an other side. If your training is really sporadic, or you're regularly in class but not really engaging, or you're not putting the effort in, then I will want more from you. And if I'm honest, I suspect that other students will too. Because there's a social contract in the dojo. We're all there together. We're all investing our time. We're all trying to improve. And I think we owe something to each other. I think there's another part of brave leadership that we don't talk about enough. Sometimes we get it wrong. I might misjudge somebody. I might say something badly. I might push somebody too hard. I might not challenge somebody enough. And what do I do then? I don't hide behind being the instructor. I apologise, I acknowledge it, I learn. Because if I'm asking my students to be courageous enough to make mistakes, I have to be courageous enough to make them myself. And then, of course, to own them. Perhaps this is the bit that I find most interesting, the ripple effect, because we don't always know what impact we have. I might say something to somebody in the dojo, and for me, it's a Tuesday night, another class, another correction, another conversation, and I might forget about it. But that person might take those words home. They might remember them for tomorrow. They might remember them in 6 months' time. Maybe I've said, you've got this. Maybe I've said, please don't give up. Maybe I've said, you really are better than you think you are. And I might not remember saying it, but they might. And that's the responsibility. We don't always get to see the ripple. And of course, that ripple isn't always positive. This is something I have to be conscious of too. Sometimes I'm demanding because I see potential. I know somebody can do better, and I want to draw that out of them. Maybe I've got a group of children who are being particularly playful. They're distracted, they're not listening, and I give them a gentle, come on, you can do better than this. My intention is good. I'm thinking about their progress. I'm thinking about the investment their parents are making. I want them to get value for their time and their money. I care about that. But the child or teenager receiving that message might not experience it in the way I intended. They might shrug it off, or they might internalize it. They might become emotional. They might hear, I'm disappointing my teacher. And that is where self-awareness comes in. I have to recognize that everyone is different. I have to know my audience. I have to notice the small changes, the expression on somebody's face, the way their shoulders change, the arms folding across the chest, the person who suddenly becomes very quiet. And sometimes the message needs to be for the whole group, and sometimes it needs to be a conversation afterwards, quietly, one-to-one. That's part of my responsibility. Not simply, did I say the right thing, but how did that person receive what I said? Because intention and impact aren't always the same thing. As a teacher, I need to care about both. And I suppose that ripple effect doesn't stop at the doors of my dojo either. When I think about the culture I want to create at Gambarukai, I think about the kind of martial arts community I want to be part of. I want to be a good example. Not because people think, not because I think I have all of the answers, and certainly not because I think I've got everything right, but because I believe that when we choose to become instructors, we have a responsibility beyond our own students. We become part of a wider martial arts community. I want the way I teach, the way I behave, and the way I speak about other instructors and organisations, and the way I treat people to reflect positively on the martial arts that I love. I want people to look at what we're doing at Gambarukai and think, that's the kind of martial arts community I want to be part of. I want to demonstrate that you can have high standards without humiliating people. You can be demanding without being unkind. You can be ambitious without making people feel that their worth is dependent on achievement. You can be strong without needing to dominate. And you can lead without believing that you are better than the people you are leading. That's another part of Budo for me. It's not simply about what happens when we are wearing our gi and standing in the dojo. It's about who we are when we leave it. Because ultimately, we're all contributing to the culture of martial arts. Every instructor, every senior student, every dojo, every interaction. And if I can make even a small contribution to making that culture more courageous, more respectful, more curious, and more compassionate, then that's something I'm very proud to be part of. I don't simply want to create good karateka. Of course, I want people to develop good karate. I want people to understand technique. I want them to work hard. I want people to be able to grade. I want them to improve. But I want something more than that. I want people to become braver than I was. I want somebody who walks through the door, the dojo door, feeling nervous to eventually think, I can do this. I want someone who is frightened of failure to learn that failure isn't the end. I want someone who lacks confidence to discover that they are capable of more than they thought. I want people to support each other. I want them to challenge each other. I want them to feel safe enough to try. And I want them to understand that their belt is not their identity. It's only just a small part of their journey. The belt tells me something about what you've achieved. It doesn't tell me everything about who you are. So that's why Budo matters to me, because the goal isn't simply to become technically better. It's to become better at becoming yourself. Perhaps that's what I've been trying to understand through all of this. Teaching isn't really about having all of the answers. It's about being aware of the responsibility that comes with having somebody stand in front of you and say, teach me. They're trusting you, trusting your knowledge, trusting your judgment. Sometimes trusting your belief in them when they don't have much belief in themselves. And I think that means we have to be brave leaders, not perfect leaders, not loud leaders, brave ones. Brave enough to challenge, brave enough to say not yet, brave enough to admit when we are wrong, brave enough to let people fail, and brave enough to create an environment where our students feel safe enough to try. Because I don't just want people to become better at karate. I want them to become more courageous human beings. Perhaps that's one of the greatest responsibilities of teaching Budo, because the teacher isn't separate from the lesson. The teacher is part of the lesson. Everything we say, everything we do, everything we tolerate, everything we celebrate, it all teaches. And we may never know just how much impact we have on the people who choose to stand in front of us. So perhaps the question I need to keep asking myself isn't simply, am I teaching good karate? It's what kind of people are we becoming together? If you're enjoying my podcasts, please like and share. It helps contribute to the magic of my mind that keeps producing this stuff, my musings each week. But finally, thank you for listening. Until next time, keep training, keep learning, and of course, keep going. Keep going with a little bit of Gambaroo spirit in your hearts.